We're going to cover a topic that it doesn't look like will be so practical right now, but things might change. We're optimistic people, and you never know. So that's so hopefully this will be um, somewhat practical for this week for this year on Pesach, and so it's the Korban Pesach. It's interesting to note that like our Pesach, the way we celebrate Pesach for the last close to 2,000 years, has really been lacking. Our Pesach has become mostly about like cleaning and maybe at best some good divrei Torah at the Seder, but the real Pesach, like the Pesach, if you just like imagine for a second and read like the psukim. So Pesach's really all about the Korban Pesach. Yeah, the Korban Pesach's only done on the 14th, and it's only eaten on the night, the first night, and then afterwards there's nothing to do with the Korban Pesach. But it seems like the Korban Pesach's like really what really anchors Pesach and what Pesach's really all about. There's like 6 or 7 mitzvos that have to do with the Korban Pesach, right? And even like not having chametz, it's like you can't have chametz on Erev Pesach because of the Korban Pesach. So the Korban Pesach was given even before Pesach was, so it's fascinating that like we're really missing just about all of Pesach, when we have Pesach. So so when I was preparing for like what to talk about as we got, there's a halacha that you're supposed to prepare 30 days before 30 days before Pesach to prepare the halachos of Pesach. So we start on Shushan Purim. So what topic to look at? So there's always like the interesting things about the Seder, and there's always interesting things about chametz and matzah and maror. But really, like the Korban Pesach's what it's all about. That's really what Pesach's all about. And hopefully, there's an idea of the Navi says in the Shalim Parim Sasenu that by studying the halachos of the psukim of the Corban, so that's as if you're giving the Corban. In some sense, there's that idea. So hopefully that's what we'll accomplish by going through some of the halachos of Corban Pesach and the mitzvah of Corban Pesach. But it's an interesting topic. Okay, so let's get into it. So the Rambam starts off. He says, "On mitzvah nunhei hu shetzivanu lahakriv seha Pesach b'yom haba nisar b'Nisan." Right. So we know that Pesach starts on the 15th. The 14th is technically Erev Pesach, but the mitzvah of Corban Pesach takes place on Erev Pesach, right? So Erev Pesach is different than Erev Sukkot. It's different than Erev Shavuos. It has its own unique status, and there's an entire parak in Shas that deals with Erev Pesach because of its unique status, and that status is not dependent on the Korban, meaning that Erev Pesach without a Korban Pesach is just as special as Erev Pesach with the Korban Pesach. So it's not like that once we don't have the Korban Pesach, then Erev Pesach, its uniqueness falls apart. It's not true. It's just as unique, and there's good reason to say that you shouldn't be working on Erev Pesach. But that's not what we're doing here. So this mitzvah says lahakriv. It's to give the Korban Pesach, right? Lahakriv means to offer, right? To offer the Korban Pesach, which makes sense that would be that's what you're going to find when it comes to all the different korbanos. It's going to say lahakriv. Now I think I might have covered this in the introduction, but just to know, if you look in your own Mishnah Torah, you might see that the word here is lishchot. Okay, the Rambam wrote the Sefer HaMitzvos. He wrote every single book except for the Mishnah Torah. He wrote in Arabic. And then somebody came along and translated it. So Ibn Tibbon is the translation that most of us have at home, and his translation says lishchot, to shecht, but that's not really the correct translation of the Arabic. Not that I speak Arabic and I would have any idea, but there's a more authentic translation by somebody named Rav Yosef Kafach, who was a Taimani great, who retranslated about 100 different works that were written in Arabic. He went back and translated into modern Hebrew because he only died in the late 2000, I think around the year 2000, maybe 2001. That's when he died. So he translated most of these works again into modern day Hebrew, and he translates this word as lahakriv, and that's a little controversial, because you can see why everybody else translated it as lishchot, because the Rambam here, this is our first question, in his introduction to the halachos of Corban Pesach, writes that the mitzvah is to shecht, right? He says lishchot es Pesach bizmano, and here he says mitzvah sase lishchot es Pesach labasar lachodesh Nisan. So he says the mitzvah is to shech the korban. Now this is controversial for two reasons. Number one, first of all, now we have a contradiction, right? What's the mitzvah? Is the mitzvah like every other korban to give it to lahakriv, or is the mitzvah to shecht? Right, that's the question.
How do you define what the hakriv is as opposed to shechitah? Shechitah is slaughtering the animal.
Yeah, shechitah is just the right. That's the end of shechitah.
Right, and the hakriv
is
right before that.
Four components to the hakriv. So the first and most important, we're going to see in a minute, is zerikas hadam. You take the blood, and in some sort of sprinkling fashion, you put it onto the mizbeach, the animal's blood. When you shech the animal, you have to have a special kli that collects the blood, right? So that there's a kohen that stands there, collects the blood, and that blood is then by another kohen. Shechitah is kosher bazar. Anybody can shecht, right? So Yisrael can shecht. That's not a problem. But the zerikas hadam, the hakrava, the next four steps, that must be done by a kohen. So zerikas hadam is the most important. Bring it up onto the mizbeach is one of the parts of hakrava, right? So that's the difference here. So if I say that the mitzvah is to shech,
the hakriv is all inclusive
of those four.
Does it include shechitah?
No.
But shechitah is obviously a prerequisite.
You can't. I mean, yeah. It's
right. So the follow up to your father's question, at least my follow up is, what's the proximity required between shechitah and the hakriv? Can it be 2 days before?
It has to be immediate. It's like there's especially in Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach you only have, right? Korban Pesach the way it was, what?
There's a time factor.
Yeah, well, Korban Pesach has to be done Erev Pesach. It can only be started in the afternoon. There's only 3 shifts that they do the Korban Pesach in, right? So you don't have time.
So I'm missing something though. So if there's a time element, you're saying shechitah is not tied to lahakriv, but because the proximity is required, then it really is tied to lahakriv.
No. In other words,
if I did shechitah on the 13th,
it's tied to it practically, but not halachically.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying. So there's not necessarily the way you suggested is that there's a possible conflict in the Rambam between lahakriv and shechitah.
There is.
Why?
What's the mitzvah?
Lahakriv.
So do I have to do shechitah?
We just said you have to because of the proximity.
Why?
Because without shechitah, you can't do lahakriv.
That's a practical answer, not a conceptual answer.
How would you do lahakriv without shechitah?
That's not. Let me correct you. You ready?
Okay.
The question is, what's the role of shechitah? Is shechitah halachically significant, or is it merely a hechsher?
I mean, at least so far it's a hechsher.
So then the mitzvah wouldn't say mitzvah saseh lishchot. You don't have mitzvah saseh to build your sukkah.
You have a mitzvah say to have your candles ready for Shabbos.
No, you don't. Not in my Torah, you don't.
Really?
Yeah.
We just learned the Kitzur. It seems very clear that you need to have your. How are you going to light candles without candles or oil?
Yeah. How are you going to sit in your sukkah without building the sukkah?
That's a hechsher. That's the whole point. That doesn't make it a mitzvah saseh.
Okay.
Right. So now, John, just to help you out here, right? When you have a hechsher mitzvah, right? So the question is, what's the halachic significance of a hechsher mitzvah? You're a big Yerushalmi guy, it sounds like, because Yerushalmi says that the hechsher mitzvah is so important. Right. Yeah. Hold on. The hechsher mitzvah is so important that you have to make a bracha on the hechsher. So you'd be making a bracha on setting up the candles, right, and building your sukkah. No one else does that. That's only the Yerushalmi says that. The Bible doesn't say that, and we don't paskin that way because we hold that hechsher mitzvah. Yeah, okay, it's important, but not that important. You're definitely not going to write mitzvah saseh. So the Rambam here, what?
I can't eat my Corban Pesach at night unless I do shechitah. I can eat it without doing zerika. I can eat it without doing zerika, but I'm not allowed to halachically.
That's not a Korban Pesach. That's just an animal. That's just dinner.
The sprinkling of the blood makes it a Korban Pesach.
It's
It
a
makes
Corban.
That's a krava. A krava has the four components. If you do a krava, then it's a korban. If you don't do a krava, what makes it a korban? What makes it any different than dinner? Right?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So here, right? So if you read this, it's svena lahakriv. So I'd say, okay, do you have to do shechitah? So you're going to say, of course you have to do shechitah. How could you do a krava without shechitah? But yeah, that's great. Is shechitah halachically significant? So you'd say, at best, it's a hechsher. Right? You'd say, okay, you have to do it. Yes, there's halach, and there's halachas of how to do shechitah. Right? Permissibly, more than just regular shechitah. But there's halachas of how you do shechitah in the mikdash, right? And there are different, but that's not going to be a significant din in the mitzvah of Korban Pesach.
So in terms of the hakriv in this case, if I do shechitah not thinking that it's going to be my korban, can I then do the korban on that shechitah?
So there's a whole prakim and shas about this. It's called there's something called pigul, where you have the wrong mindset, right? As a machokasim, if pigul can take place during shechitah or just during a krava, which is all a phenomena of this, which is usually not a big deal because no one would ever say that there's a mitzvah to shecht when it comes to a korban, which is what makes the Korban Pesach so odd, right? It's odd for two reasons. It's odd, number one, because is it hakrava or shechitah, right? It seems to be we have a steer on the Rambam. And the second reason why it's odd is because there's no such thing as a significant shechitah when it comes to a korban. It's always a hechsher. And now the Rambam is saying, no, not only is it not a hechsher, it is the mitzvah. Right? That's what's so strange. Okay, so those are our first two questions. I have to tell you, like for a couple of days when I was learning the sugya, so I thought I was misunderstanding it because it seems so strange that if it was this strange, then people should be talking about it. So how could it be so strange and no one's talking about it? So I felt like I must be missing it because it's like glaring here that it says mitzvah, that the mitzvah would be to shecht, the Korban Pesach. Here, the Rambam doesn't even say hakrava. He doesn't even talk about a korban. He just says ha Pesach, right? So he doesn't even say korban, right? Later on, in a couple of halachos he'll talk about it. But that's like very strange. So now our first question is, what is the mitzvah? Let's say, what's the mitzvah? So you tell me, if you're a Sefer Mitzvahs person, you're going to say the mitzvah is hakriv. If you're a Mishnah Torah person, you're going to say the mitzvah is lishchot. Right? So, okay, so how do we understand? So then, look at this. So then we see this halacha in Hilchos Brachos, okay, that let's say you have different parts to a mitzvah. That happens all the time, right? So it's tefillin, he gives an example, right? You have to make the tefillin, you write the tefillin, you have to make the tefillin, then you put the tefillin on. Tzitzis, you have to tie the strings, you have to put them on your beged, and then you have to wear them, right? Sukkah, you have to build the sukkah, then you have to sit in the sukkah. There you go, John. Shabbos, right? So, okay, you got to set the candles up, and then you got to light the candles, right? So you have all these things. So where do you make the bracha, right? Where do you make the bracha on this, right? Do you maybe make it at the beginning? We have a concept that you say over l'siyasan, that before you do the mitzvah, that's when you have to make the bracha, right? So I'll say, okay, so before the very beginning of me doing the mitzvah, that's where I'll make the bracha. So that's not true, right? The Rambam says that the bracha is said right at the end of the second component. Okay. Now here we win the lottery here because normally we'd have to guess what do you do when it comes to Corban Pesach, when do you make the bracha? But here the Rambam says shachat pescho v'chayaso mevarach lishchot. One of his examples, it's like winning the lottery. One of his examples is the Corban Pesach. So if you ask me, hey Uri, when do you make the bracha on the Corban Pesach? I'd be like, it's like every other korban before the akrava. Right? Because that's the second component to it. That's the second part. But yet, what does he say here? He says it's before the shechitah. And the bracha's text is not al mitzvahs Korban Pesach or al kravas Korban Pesach or la hakriv Korban Pesach. It uses the word lishchot. Mevarach lishchot es Pesach. I mean, you can't get more clear here what the Rambam is telling you. Right? He's saying that the mitzvah is there, if you ask the Rambam, wait, but there's something you do after shechitah, right? So you say, yeah, of course, you do a krava, right? So you'd say, okay, so if you do a krava, so why are you saying lishchot? This is your big problem, right? So that's so now we're really pointing towards the mitzvah being lishchot. The Rambam's really putting all his chips here on lishchot, which is very strange.
And Rabbi, and I don't want to take you too far off topic, but my understanding of kind of Rambam's perspective on korbanot was very much kind of against the shechitah being the important, like the ikar, because it was the concept was korbanot was kind of a polemic against
and stop, you're going philosophical here. Okay, so I'm stopping you right there, cutting you off. Nice more Nevuchim stuff. Not for now. Okay, so now, right? Okay, so let's go. So let's see. Okay, now here is strange. The Kodesh Baruch Hu seems to like go with the Rambam here, right? So he says it's a strange thing, right? But that's obviously the other way. But it's a joke. Okay, so in the Psukim about Corban Pesach, the Kodesh Baruch Hu says the shachtu also kol kahal das Yisrael bein arbayim. That what's the ikar here? Not that Bnei Yisrael should give the korban, but rather they should shecht it together in the afternoon, right? That's the pasuk. The pasuk says, right, that this should be something that you do every 14th on the 14th of the month. You shecht it together, right? The shechitah is like the ikar here, okay? Strange. But now you have a problem, okay? The minchas chinuch. So I generally don't quote achronim. But I could not understand what the Rambam was saying. So I started looking at who could possibly talk about this. So the Minchas Chinuch gives the strangest answer I've ever seen to anybody explaining a Rambam. He says, it says shechitah. It's a huge problem because the mitzvah can't be shechitah. It doesn't make any sense for a mitzvah to be shechitah. So he says it can't be. So he says the two words. He says shechitah lav dafka. He says it's not really, the Rambam wasn't specific. He didn't really mean it. He wasn't careful with his language, which is like the entire way we read Rambam is that he's thought through every single word. And so like for him to say, shechitah presents a problem, and therefore it's lav dafka shechitah, and he has a very good proof. Because here the Rambam says, shachtu lemulim, v'zarak hadam l'shemulim, right? So v'arelim. Okay, so the Corban Pesach can't be given, can't be eaten by or shechted or anything, it seems, by somebody who's not circumcised, okay, by an orel. Can't have that, okay? And when you shecht the Korban Pesach, there's a list, right? The Korban Pesach you can't have leftovers of the Korban Pesach. There's an isser called nosar, which means you're not allowed to leave the Korban Pesach over, okay? So the Korban Pesach has to be eaten by chatzos. Everybody's got to finish, and you got to finish an entire animal by chatzos. That the whole thing's got to be consumed. So, and the Korban Pesach, in case you didn't realize, is dessert. The chagiga, the shlomim chagiga, that's what's eaten for dinner. You have a steak for dinner. And then when it comes time for dessert, okay, what are we having? So we're going to have matzah with maror and the Korban Pesach. You have essentially a shawarma for dinner, right? That's what it is. It's a shawarma that's really a shawarma. It's lettuce with I don't know, nobody has lettuce in this, but it's like a wrap, okay? And this is your dessert. So if you're already full on steak, how in the world are you going to have ala sova, right? Because it says you have to be full. You can't hold back, right? The Pesach is supposed to be eaten ala sova. It's supposed to be eaten when you're already satiated. In other words, when you would normally bench, that's when you have the Korban Pesach. So how much could you possibly have? So you'd share it with a lot of people. Siddharim were huge, so that everybody could have some of the Korban Pesach, but consume the animal. On your list can only be people that are allowed to eat the Korban Pesach. If you would add somebody in, let's say I got a non-Jewish neighbor, he's great. He'll love Pesach. He always talks about how much he loves Jewish ritual. Bring him in. We'll put him on the list. Okay, so you put him on the list. Now the whole Korban Pesach is puzzled. Nobody can eat from the Korban Pesach now. The whole thing is done, right? So this is what this Rambam is. Shachtu l'molim v'zarak hadam l'shem mulin v'arelim puzzle. Okay, while the Kohen is doing zerikas hadam, okay, if he has in mind the whole list, he goes, okay, I got the whole list, and he reads Chris Christensen on the list. So the Kohen is probably, the guy's probably a ger. Okay, great, no problem. But turns out Chris Christensen never converted, right? He was never a ger. So then, right, it's puzzle. The whole thing is puzzle. Why? Shazrika chamura shehi ikar korban. Because the zrika, the sprinkling of the blood, that's the ikar korban. So the Minchas Chinuch looks at this line and he says, see, the Rambam is lav dafka when he said shechitah. Here he says, what's the ikar of the korban? Zrika, not shechitah. So I said, okay, well, that's a good proof. But that's still strange that the Rambam wrote shechitah when he didn't mean it. Okay, so then I was justified. So this I bought this book like 15 years ago. I never got a chance to look inside of it, but it was so unique. I didn't want to pass up on it when it was for sale. I don't think you can get this book anymore. I don't know, but it's
Before we get to the Sefer,
yeah.
does it help us at all when we look at how the Torah phrases other karbanos, like the Korban Tamid? The Psukim start off by talking about Hakrava, and then the pasuk goes, and then it goes into details, shechting and zerika.
Right, but no. So yes, shechitah is mentioned, but that's not an ikar part of the halacha. And it seems from the Rambam that either isn't here, even though he says the mitzvah shechitah. So, okay, so so this is Rav Gifter Zatzal, who was the Rosh Hashiva of Telz in Cleveland, Ohio, wrote a perush on the Minchas Chinuch. You never find perushim on the Minchas, like perushim on an Acharon's work, but he wrote a perush on the Minchas Chinuch, and it was like, I saw this the happiest thing in the world. He says, Lishchot b'yom yadad, mishum dat zivui kasuv, right? So why is the mitzvah to shecht? He says, because that's what the pasuk says. Shechato so kol kal das Yisrael ben arbaim. Asher bazeh shona Korban Pesach mikol chuy v'korban. Because, and this is where Pesach is different from all other karbanos, he says. Sheina mitzvah klalis shel havas korban. Because this is not like all other karbanos. Ela sheyesh kan mitzvah mesuyemes shel shechitah Korban Pesach. There's a mitzvah, like a specific mitzvah of shechitah when it comes to the Korban Pesach. She'im shachat v'lo hikriv b'shar avodas lo kaim. It's just like every other time, if you would shecht and not give the korban, right? So you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. Lo kam minchas chinuch, right? And it's not like the minchas chinuch says, right? Shekasav el shehainu akrava ad zerikas hadam. That really the mitzvah is akrava. Umizat tam yesh b'zeh mitzvah shechitah b'baylim kolo shar karbanos. And here's what that's why you have a mitzvah shechitah. Now here he says this is fascinating, a fascinating proof he gives. He says, now how many of us are going to actually shecht our own Korban Pesach? If I don't know how to shecht, I'm not shechting my korban, right? None of us, I don't know, anybody here know how to shecht? I don't know how to shecht, right? So most people, I'm sure, they give the Korban Pesach have no idea how to shecht. So you go to the base of Mikdash and you say to the Kohen, hey, do me a favor, I'm gonna appoint you and everybody on my list here to shecht for me. So the Kohen's gonna say, okay, I'll shecht for you, no problem, right? That's what he's gonna say that, right? No problem. Say, do it. And not only that, but then, so you say, well, hold on, the mitzvah's on the person. How could he have shlichus? We learn all of shlichus from this mitzvah, from the shlichus of shchitas Pesach. He says that's how you see, right? Why is Gemara choose this mitzvah of all mitzvahs to learn this out from? And the answer is because you would have such a strong notion to think that you can't appoint somebody else because it's your mitzvah to do the shchitas Pesach. So here the Gemara is specifically making the point that even though you might think that shechitah is so important when it comes to Corban Pesach that only you could do it, no, here too shechitah works as well. And this justifies our entire approach. I'm very happy to rely on Rav Gifter that really we're reading the Rambam correctly, that there's actually a mitzvah to shecht. In which case you have to ask, what makes shechitah, right, so essential to the mitzvah of Corban Pesach? Masha'enkein, what's not true of other korbanos. Okay, this is very exciting. Okay, the going on. Let's look at another aspect of Corban Pesach. And there's so many things, by the way, to look at Corban Pesach. You could spend, I'm telling you, spend a whole year. I really think you spend a whole year on all the different aspects, halachically, not philosophically, of Corban Pesach. It's amazing. Okay, the Gemara says like this: Gufa, Isha. Okay, now we know there's two Korbanos Pesach. There's Korban Pesach for the first one, and if you make the Korban Pesach, great, like the first Pesach, and you're down Nisan. If you're Tamei, Derech, or Choka, like you live far away, you couldn't make it, and it's not your fault. So then you can do Pesach Sheni 1 month later. Okay. So the question is, a woman, is she chayeves? This is what the Gemara is vacillating back and forth. Is a woman chayeves to give both Korbanos Pesach? Okay. So I'm not going to go through the whole Gemara because it's going to take us a while. I did it on the introduction, so if you want to look through it, you can look there. But there's a machlokas. So basically, there's a machlokas between three people: Rebbe Yehuda, Rebbe Yossi, and Rebbe Shimon. Okay, Rebbe Yehuda and Rebbe Yossi essentially both agree. Okay, in terms of the first korban, and the second Korban Pesach, a different story. But they both agree that a woman is chayeves. She is obligated in Pesach, the Korban Pesach on Pesach Rishon for sure. Okay, they both agree, and Rebbe Shimon definitely holds that they're not. Okay, they're not. He holds that they're not chayeves to give Korban Pesach. Okay, now where do they get this from? Rabbi Yehuda Savar, but michsas nefashos, right? It says that a calculation of the people, talking about the list that you have. So it says the people, right? So why doesn't it say ish or anashim? So it says, well, the fact that it says nefashos specifically, that's vafilu nashim, even women. So women are included, okay? And Rabbi Shimon says the next word in the pasuk is ish, right? He says, oh, yes, it's the next word. You see, that's what you would turn to you'd be like, how'd you miss it? It's the next word. It says ish, ish in, yeah, ish yes, isha lo, a woman not, okay? So now you'd be like, okay, that's the machlokas, two psukim. They read the psukim differently, very simple machlokas, but that's not how we learn, right? So we learn and we say that there's right? We have to understand how does Rabbi Shimon under his opinion, what's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, and what's the debate between them. But keep in mind, what we're saying here is the psukim are not the machlokas. That's not the source of the machlokas. There's a concept here, right? The psukim are letting us in on the concept. So we have to understand what the concept is, okay? Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon are not arguing about how you read a pasuk. They're saying the pasuk is telling us something conceptual about the mechanics of the halacha, of this mitzvah. And that's what we have to understand. There's something about Corban Pesach that does apply to women and that doesn't apply to women. Okay, that's the debate. Everybody see that? That's a very important methodological point. Don't ever look at a machlokas and be like, oh, they're reading the psukim differently. That's the machlokas. That doesn't make any sense. Well, why is the pasuk written differently? How are they reading the pasuk differently? What's it all about? Okay, so there's a very simple question that should apply to anybody asking the question is, how do we know if women are chayavos in a mitzvah or not? It's very simple. We ask one simple question: is it time generated? If it's a time generated mitzvah, we say mitzvah saseh shazman grama. Women are exempt. If it's not time generated, women are obligated. Right? Very simple. That's our metric. Now there are certain times where women are chayeves in the mitzvah. For instance, Shabbos. Shabbos is the key example. You can't have a more time generated mitzvah than Shabbos. Right? So every 7 days. And yet women are obligated because there's a special limud to explain that women are obligated, and then you have to understand the concept there. Okay, good, fine, but that should be our question here. In fact, many Rishonim asked the question. So the Mari Korsko says, Mishum to have a mitzvah saseh shazman grama, it's tichra. Now, why does once Rabbi Yehuda brings a pasuk? Why is Rabbi Yehuda bringing a pasuk? He has to bring a pasuk to show that women are obligated, because what would you say about Korban Pesach? Since it's on Yudal Nisan, so it's a time-generated mitzvah, women are exempt. So therefore, in order to show that they're chayeves even above mitzvah saseh shazman grama, he has to bring a pasuk. Okay, so he brings a pasuk. He shows that inside the mitzvah, built into the mitzvah, is the a concept that overrides mitzvah saseh shazman grama, just like Shabbos, just like all other times that they're chayeves. Okay, good.
Or because they were involved in the mitzvah.
Well, hold on. That's what you're saying is the concept. Okay, but he's saying right away, he's just talking right here technically. Okay, he's saying technically that's how it works. And now, so why doesn't, so he asked the question, why doesn't Rabbi Shimon just say, why doesn't he answer Rabbi Yehuda and just say, no, it's a mitzvah saseh shazman grama, so women are exempt, right? Why doesn't he just answer that way? So he says, once Rabbi Yehuda brings in the pasuk to say that they're obligated, then in order to beat off Rabbi Yehuda, what does he have to say? Right? He has to bring in another pasuk to show that his pasuk doesn't work. What's really happening here? In reality, Rabbi Shimon is agreeing with Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to mitzvah saseh shazman grama. Follow this. Okay, you ready? When Rabbi Yehuda is coming along and saying, yeah, okay, it's a mitzvah saseh shazman grama, but we have this concept X, whatever it is, that's going to make women chayeves, even though it's a time-generated mitzvah. So Rabbi Shimon could have said, no, but it's time generated. Instead, he says, this is what it's in essence he's saying. Yes, you're right. That concept overrides mitzvah saseh shazman grama, but you're misunderstanding that in reality, there's another concept that shows that the concept that you think that beats a mitzvah saseh shazman grama doesn't actually beat the mitzvah saseh shazman grama at the end of the story when it comes to Korban Pesach. This is a very complicated machlokas. It's like it has a lot of steps to it. It's really fun. Okay, so that's right. So that's
sorry, Rabbi, can you do that again? I missed a part of that. Sorry.
100%. You ready? Okay. We should have very simple. If you just make believe we had lines, right? So the first line would be like, okay, are women obligated in Korban Pesach or not? First answer would be, is it time generated, right? So you'd say yes. Okay, so women should be exempt. So Rabbi Yehuda comes along and says, wait a minute, right? It says that they're exempt, right? because of mitzvah sasei magrama, they should be exempt. But, right, we have a pasuk. So the pasuk tells us that they're obligated. Okay, so Shimon comes along and says, "Oh, I have another pasuk that says that they're exempt." But really, what Shimon should have said was they're exempt because it's a time-bound mitzvah. So what the Mari Kurskos is saying is, no, but hold on. Once Rabbi Yehuda brings a pasuk, then everybody agrees that that's a real concept. You can't just ignore the concept. So even Rabbi Shimon says, yes, you're right. There's a concept that tells us that women should be obligated, right? So now he has to bring in another concept to show why, yes, even though that concept is true, he's not saying Yehuda's concept isn't true. Because if he did feel that Yehuda was wrong, completely wrong, he would just revert back to mitzvah sasei shel zman grama. But the fact that he doesn't revert back to mitzvah sasei shel zman grama says, yes, I agree that that's good reasoning, but I have better reasoning to show that not only are they exempt because mitzvah sasei shel zman grama, they're exempt for another reason as well.
Thank you.
Fascinating. Okay. So what's the reasoning, right? Okay, so Tosfos says, this is fascinating. Tosfos comes along and says, we've got, what's really are applying this Tosfos. Tosfos doesn't talk about our case, but it's the same thing. There's only two mitzvos that if you don't do them, you get kares. Bris Milah and Korban Pesach. Every other type of thing that you get kares for is violating a prohibition, okay? So Tosfos says that when it comes to Bris Milah is also a mitzvah sasei shel zman grama. Why? Right? Because we're not going to go so far to go into it, but because it can only be done during the daytime. Okay? So Tosfos says it can only be during the daytime. So now if the Gemara asks, are women chayeves in Milah, right? Do they have to give their sons a bris Milah? So the answer would be no, because it's a mitzvah sasei shel zman grama. But the Gemara brings a pasuk to prove it. So Tosfos says, why does it need a pasuk? Because Tosfos says, whenever you have something that's so important, like something that has a mitzvah, if you don't do it, it has kares. So then you need a pasuk to exempt women, right? So Tosfos is like sort of hinting to us. He's saying that when you have one of these two mitzvahs, he only says milah, but it applies to Pesach just as much. Whenever you have a mitzvah that has a kares to it, it's so important, right? It's so important that you have the women should be obligated as well, okay? And therefore you need a pasuk to exempt women. Right? If you want to exempt women from bris Milah and therefore Corban Pesach, you need a pasuk because it's so important. Which then begs the question: what makes Corban Pesach so crucial, so important that it has kares? Right? Okay, so that's a good question, right? So thankfully, the Tashbetz answers our question for us. Okay, and he says as follows: the Tashbetz, late Rishon, he says as follows. He says, and this is what my father said before, that women were part of the miracle of the redemption from Mitzrayim, right? From the Yetzias Mitzrayim, they were part of it. And we have a principle that the Rabbanan taught us that we learn by Chanukah and Purim, that when women are involved in the miracle itself, and the mitzvah sasei comes to exempt us from we have a concept that when you have a mitzvah that women are involved in, right? So, or an event that women are involved in, and a mitzvah that comes to commemorate, celebrate that event. So if women were involved in the event, they're obligated to do it, right? That's the idea. So says the Tashbetz, what is Korban Pesach, right? Korban Pesach is, right, about an event. What event? Right? Our houses were spared on the night of Korban Pesach. The first Korban Pesach was given, right? When was the first Korban Pesach given? It was given on the 14th at night, right? 15th, right? As it was changing, right? So right, they shechted on the 14th, just like we do. And then the 15th, they ate the Korban Pesach, right? And then that night, Paro's running around saying, get out of here, everybody's dying, right? There, the women were spared as well, the sorrow of having a house that was full of people dying, right? So therefore, they were part of it, and therefore, they're obligated, right? Just like he says, he says that's why also it comes to Chanukah and Purim, the women are also obligated, even though it's a time-generated mitzvah, right? So what's the idea here? Now work backwards, okay? Work backwards. What's the idea here? Says Rebbe Yehuda, right? Okay, well, we're going to get to the answer here, but here's the question. Really, the question is like this: as what about kares, right? We talk about Tosfos. What about kares obligates a woman in a mitzvah that's time generated? And now, at a Talmud Torah Kula type question, okay, how does being part of the miracle obligate a woman in the mitzvah after the fact that she's usually exempt from a time generated mitzvah? Okay, so let's talk about what the Korban Pesach is now. Okay, what is the nature of Korban Pesach? What is the Korban Pesach? Korban Pesach is clearly unique from other karbanos. Okay, most other karbanos are a vehicle of kapara, are a vehicle of atonement. Right, that's what most karbanos are. Korban Toda, a little different, vehicle of gratitude. Right, yeah, you say it from something specific, you give a Korban Toda. Okay, that's what it is. So what is Korban Pesach? Right? What is the Korban Pesach? Okay, so it's clear from the Tashbetz here, and then it fits all of our things here. What's the Korban Pesach? The Korban Pesach is part of its reenactment of us leaving Mitzrayim. Right? It's part of that commemoration. It's part of that celebration. That's what it is. Right? That's what the Korban Pesach is. Okay, it's not like other karbanos. It's solely unique. I don't know if that's redundant, but it's like, but it is the most unique of karbanos, and that's why you don't have a korban sukkos. You don't have a korban shuas. What exactly would you be doing in that korban, right? Well, there's something to commemorate, right? So here a Korban Pesach, yes, something to commemorate. There's a korban instituted as part of that process. Okay, so what's the mitzvah? Right? What's the mitzvah? Let's go now answer our questions, right? So what's the mitzvah when it comes to Corban Pesach? So there's two dinim to Corban Pesach. In the mitzvah of the Corban Pesach, there are two different dinim. There's shechitah and hakrava, okay? Now, okay, great. So all you did was answer the question, and you said, okay, is it shechitah or is it hakrava? And the answer is both. Okay, so what have you helped us here, right? So the answer is that no, because you would think in a normal Corban, what would you think? Right? The normal Corban, you think that shechitah is just a mere hechsher. In every other Corban, shechitah is a hechsher mitzvah. Here, it's part and parcel of the mitzvah itself. It's not merely a hechsher, it has a halachic significance. That's a huge chiddush, and that's what the Rambam is bringing. So you'll say, wait a minute, hold on a second, great. So all you've done now again is just simply restated everything. You took your questions, restated as an answer. So you took away the question mark, and you took away the first word, and then you just restated it, and that's your svara. Okay, except for the fact that what are we doing? We're replicating the first Korban Pesach. The first Corban Pesach and ikar of the first Korban Pesach was shechitah. That's why, or I shouldn't say why is going to confuse us philosophically. I'm not talking philosophically, but I'm saying that's why you have shechitah as an essential component here. Because the whole Korban Pesach is a reenactment of the process of what happened in Mitzrayim. And just like in Mitzrayim, a key crucial element of the Korban Pesach was shechitah, right? It's mentioned in the Sukkim, you have to go out and shech the Korban. Okay, so too, right? So now shechitah becomes an essential component because you're reenacting it. If you'd say, like, okay, what are we doing here on Erev Pesach in the Beis HaMikdash, right? You have a kid who doesn't know anything, or you have somebody who doesn't know anything. What are we doing here? So just like our forefathers gave shechitah the Korban Pesach on Erev Pesach, so too we're going to do the same thing because we're reenacting the entire process of what happened, and that's why shechitah is an essential component of the mitzvah here. Okay.
But why isn't it? It's an essential part of every Corban.
No, it's a hechsher in other karbanos.
It's a hechsher in other Corbanos. Okay.
Here, the bailim are chayiv in shechitah. That's the idea.
Rabbi, if the Korban Pesach is just a reenactment of the original Korban Pesach, originally, did they even do the whole sprinkling of the blood? Like, how do they even know how to do that? All that stuff.
So I don't think they did. I don't know. I don't think. I think the first one. Well, I have to look into it. I was thinking about this a lot.
Right. So why would just the slaughtering be the reenactment? Why do you need to bring a korban? Why can't you just slaughter an animal?
I don't know. It could not have been. I don't know. I have to really look into it. Something that I wanted to think about is that how did the Pesach turn into a Korban Pesach?
Right.
Right. That's right. Where did that come place? I can't remember in the first Pesach where they would have done the hakrava. Knowing how to do the hakrava, but if there wasn't a hakrava at all, right? So, right, I mean, there's a lot of aspects that it's not a complete replica. We don't take the blood from the Korban Pesach and put it on our doorposts, That's not, so it's not a 100% like reenactment. But the shechitah part, I think, is. Okay.
So wait, so riffing off Scott's question, couldn't you make the argument in terms of Rambam that because there was no Mishkan or Beis Hamikdash and there was no sprinkling as is known then, that the only way to make the Korban Pesach a Korban Pesach was shechitah? So at the time of leaving Egypt, that was a Korban.
You're saying shechitah becomes a krava. I don't know. That's a big chiddush.
I'm just like, to Scott's question, there wasn't the concept of a Corban with the rules of a Corban before the Mishkan.
Karbanos. All the avos gave karbanos. There was still a concept of karbanos. It wasn't done the same way, but there was karbanos. Everybody could have built a bama in their backyard. I feel like I'm missing something obvious. I feel like I'm gonna look back at this year and be like, you idiot, why didn't you? It's like the next pasuk or something, But so I'm missing something big here that I should be missing, but I don't know why. But I feel like I just know it, it's gnawing at me that there's something I'm missing. Okay. Okay. So Rabbi Yehuda, right? So what's the difference between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, right? So Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, right? Rabbi Yehuda feels that there's something so important about Corban Pesach that women have to be chayaves in it, right? While Rabbi Shimon doesn't feel that way. Okay. So what is it, right? So that thing, right? That thing is the idea of Corban Pesach has to be reenacted, right? And therefore, women were part of the miracle. So part of the reenactment has to include women. That's what Yehuda would say. So how can you have part of the reenactment and women not be part of it? They were part of it the first time. They're going to be part of it this time, right? They ate the first Corban Pesach. They were part of the first Corban Pesach. They were there, right? So okay, so kares is a reflection of that importance. Okay. So the question, the debate between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, and why being part of the miracle is such an idea for the tashbates, and why it obligates women, okay, is because the question becomes the part that they played in the miracle, right? That defines the mitzvah here, okay? The mitzvah is defined by this idea of the reenactment. So therefore, okay, when it comes to the reenactment, the question is, right, how far does this reenactment have to go? So Yehuda is going to say women were part of it. They're part of that reenactment. So Shimon is going to answer him, yeah, true. Women were part of it, and that does make sense to try to include them because of that, right? But the reenactment doesn't have to go that far. You don't have to have the exact reenactment that women are part of it. You have, right, because it says men, right? So the mitzvah is about men. Right, that's what this is. The reenactment does not need. I know it's an anticlimactic answer, but the reenactment does not require women to be part of the reenactment. That's Rabbi Shimon's point, and that's his answer. Because once we go with the Tashbeitz's svara, then I feel like we're like sort of almost like pigeonholed to understand Rabbi Shimon as saying that if he understands Corban Pesach as a reenactment, I don't know any other way of understanding it. And you say that women are exempt, then what you're saying is the reenactment does not require women. That's the idea.
I understand very easily when you bring a proof from a pasuk, but these two concepts of women also being part of the miracle and therefore they're chayiv, or it's a mitzvah saseh shazman grama and therefore they would be pasul or putter from the mitzvah. Those two things, they're not svaras. What are they? It's not a pasuk. How do we?
The first
where did that come from?
It's a principle. It's a halachic principle. What's
the source of that halachic principle? What power does it have?
That nashim paturas from mitzvah saseh shazman grama is a sugya. It's a sugya in Shas that explains it. Where we learn it from? It's a principle. It's a halachic principle like tadir shina tadir kodem, and a million other principles that we have. Also, mitzvah pater min mitzvah. There's a million principles
that come from where? From Sinai or from the Chazal made it up?
No, those are daraisa concepts.
And also that women were in the mitzvah.
It's interesting. We have like on Shabbos morning here in Mitzvah, we have chaburas. We have a round robin of people that give shiurim. So there are two guys that give shiurim that love every chabura. It's going to be on one of these principles in halacha and explaining it. this is like what later Achronim would deal a lot. The Shev Shemaitita, his whole sefer, right, is one of the hardest for him to understand. Halacha, it's all about these principles, rove, and all these doraisa concepts. Are they doraisa concepts? Are they durabanan concepts? If you have a suffix mitzvah say shazman grab are women chayavis or not because it's two principles going on, and they expend all day long. And it's good, interesting stuff, but it's like all over and over. Yeah, I hope you never watch this, but like it's like regurgitating like svara after svara. It's like applying this svara says this, and then it's very achronish. It drives me up. I get like I'm getting like I can't take.
But you have to know what the source of these things are.
Well, no, the source of they're sugyas. They're sugyas in the Gemara. The Gemara explains them. Saying, but then you have all the achronim come in and say, are these daraisas like sugyas? Are the principles daraisa? Are they darabanan principles? And they go on about it. Saying, okay, enough. Okay, there's a reason why the Rambam never discusses this stuff, and other Rishonim don't discuss this stuff. It's only Achronim discuss this stuff because it's like enough. It's like it goes on and on. So,
but the Rambam does. The Rambam will say something is a daraisa, or will say it's a midibber sofrim, or it's a
not one of these principles. Not one of these principles, though. He doesn't discuss it. He just says, in this case it applies. In this case it doesn't apply. Okay, shine. That's enough. Like that, So the Achronim didn't have anything to write about, so they go on and on and on about it. It's like I can't take this stuff. Yeah. I don't know. Okay. Whatever. It annoys me. Okay, so, but yeah. And I don't read Achronim. It's this reason, because you spend that all day long and just going on and on and on about I can't take it.
That's how you truly feel, Rabbi.
Yeah. Yeah, I just like whatever. It annoys me. It's like every time. It's like, okay, here we go. It's rove daraisas, rove darabanan. 15 nafkaminas. If rove is daraisa, then in these cases it's going to be machmir. In this case, it'll be if it's darabanan, then it's going to be suffix hakel. And then you eat the meat. You can't eat the meat. It depends if you understand. It's okay. You explain it's like you can do what are those things called? Mad libs. You can just create a form, put your principle in, ask put your question daraisa darabanan, circle one of them. And then then you put machmir, and then list 15 cases where it could apply, and then put the machmir answer and put the makel answer, and then you have a shiur.
It's a flow chart.
It's not Torah. Yeah, I mean it's Torah. Don't get me wrong. It's better than talking politics or sports. But it's not. It's like okay, enough. It's not conceptual. It's not conceptual. I don't know. It's just it was mostly laws on every gadol for the last 300 years. But whatever. That's their stuff. Okay. It's beautiful stuff. It's wonderful. Okay, if you like it. Okay, so okay. If I'm still alive next week, we'll be on. Okay. Have a good day. Have a good week, everybody.
Take care. Thanks, Rabbi.